You are listening to Ras Temari Radio, Events Necessary, where we discuss everything but politics. We're here with our good friend Sam, who was nice enough to lend us his time. Sam.
What's going on? How you doing?
Very, very, very well. It's nice to have you on. We've been talking about doing some kind of podcast together and had discussions about a number of things since the day we met. And we talked a lot about our common background in the United States, how we both came out here, and our interests in Ethiopian and as well as Eritrean history. So I'd like to start off with this. The first thing, when we talk about background and sort of acclimating and that kind of thing, what is something that you've learned when it comes to that, or that you've taught yourself recently?
In the last, I say, 12 months since my arrival to Ethiopia, I would say it's a few things. One, I had to understand time in a different way, because coming from New York City, born and raised, it was it's a very fast-paced city. You know, everything's happening in real time. Everything's nothing can be delayed. Even a train being delayed, from the subway, that throws everyone's day off, and
their mood as well. Right?
Oh, forget about it.
Right, Ethiopia or New Yorkers are famously difficult people.
Yeah, notorious. But there was also, when it comes to implementing and executing on plans, whether they be itineraries, anything that's supposed to go according to a deadline. Here, deadlines are kind of fluid. Like things take, everyone takes their time. Business deals don't happen in one day here. They happen over weeks, sometimes maybe months. Mm-hmm. New York kind of style of things is you make the agreements, and you speak about the verbal agreements in the morning, contract agreements in the afternoon, you send the money at night. Money, right. That's the transaction at night. So that it happens very fast paced. Here, no, it's very, very, very much slower. So I had to adapt to the, cultural or professional time dilation. I don't know what we really have to call it.
Yeah, it's a completely different conception of time, I think.
Yeah.
I made the same transition from New York. Actually, the same general part of New York. You're from the Bronx,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I was up in uptown in Harlem for some time. So some years ago to coming here, and it's a different conception of time, but it's also a different understanding. When you talked about verbal agreements, here people don't always necessarily mean what they say. There's often another kind of connotation or another, suggestion. Whereas New Yorkers are known, for better or for worse, for being very direct and for basically saying exactly what their expectations are up front, right? You would agree with that?
Oh, yeah. It's a very blunt place, because there's no time to sugarcoat things. Exactly. Time is the one resource, especially as a New Yorker. Time is the one resource it's the thing you can't get a refund on.
Right.
It's very valuable. And dragging things there, it's almost like you're losing money. It's almost like you're losing opportunities. So there's a bigger, people follow up with you faster. People are upfront with you about everything on the table. Everything's on the table. Here, there's a cultural aspect. I realize the difference between there and here. In New York, or in the States, but mainly in New York, people go straight to business. When you sit down, here, I realize you don't go straight to business. You talk about personal life, talk about maybe some politics. You talk about everything before you come to the actual.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that is the business.
Yeah,
that is your business. Is the personal life, the socializing, the that and that, because that's the main platform in which we do that. Business is, we do the socializing is actually the business world or the working world, and it's just kind of buried along the way. Is, hey, should we work on this or that, or do you want to do this or that together? It's a completely different. Yeah.
I had this one very it ended up being a very lucrative discussion that led to something, because it was such a good discussion with a very well-known, prominent. He's like one of the godfathers of the private sector here in Elders. And he's an old school guy. So, we talked about we went maybe 35 minutes into everything outside of the purpose of the agenda. And then when he finally gets to it, when we finally done with the coffee. So what let's now we're talking about business. Now he
Right.
wants so and it was like, okay, I guess people here, I noticed that as well. People here, business is very personal. It's a very personal thing. It's like they don't want to do business with you if they don't like how you think. You know, they don't want to even engage. They like everyone
Unless
has.
they can relate to you on a personal level.
Yeah,
Right.
very personal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a cultural thing where they want to. You have to be. It's almost like you have to be almost like a friend before you have to be a business person.
Whereas in New York, not too many people in New York have too many friends. I mean, like, you're not there to pal around, and it's also because it's such an international city. It's less tribal than not just Ethiopia, but less tribal than pretty much any place I've ever been. Where like everybody understands that everybody is different from everybody else, not just from a racial or ethnic perspective, but so many people in New York, especially Manhattan, are transplants. Right? They came and they all converged on New York, and that's what they have in common is the fact that they're also different.
Exactly. It's the melting pot aspect about it contributes to the magnitude of the diversity it has, and so yeah, that's it's not a fair comparison. New York to like New York City to Addis. It's not really.
It's not really. No.
But again, we're going back to like what I had to learn. Another thing I had to learn, not just time, and business, how business and personal and business are in alignment. I would say there's like cultural elements that I had to adapt to. Where like you mentioned a little bit about it a second ago, how there's people are not forward. People, right. It's not really out there. That has been an issue with me here as well, where even something as small as getting back to me about a certain thing we're supposed to work on, or let's move forward, like getting a contract, getting an MOU signed should not take a month and a half.
It also, I mean, it's not just getting it done, but getting people to communicate. Like you said, I think we talked about this. People making some kind of agreement here and there, and then kind of disappearing on you for a while. Like, and for no other reason, they'll be like, "Oh, well, I had other things to do." And it's like, "Well, you could have told me that." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That just it seems to happen quite a bit, and even Ethiopians complain about that quite a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not easy to navigate that kind of terrain.
Yeah, and I haven't really yet had the time to dissect that element yet, because usually when I see it, I've seen it a few times. I want to unpack it, understand it. Where does it come from? Do people have like some struggles in the background that we don't know about? Are people having like health, financial issues? We don't know. This is there's multiple crises happening, not in the country but in the world right now. So it's like we don't know the background. We don't know what's going on in the background.
See, I like that you say that, because one thing that it's a thin line between acknowledging cultural context. When people do academia, when they write about history, even in American history or whatever, it's important to place things in cultural context. There is bias, there is anti-Semitism, there's racism, there's class and gender issues, and there's all kinds of cultural contexts going on, and it's important to locate things in your cultural context. But it's one thing to acknowledge a cultural context is necessary to establish a culture as an analytical category is possibly helpful, but to simply state culture as an explanation in and of itself, I mean, people will be like, oh, why is it this way? Oh, it's just their culture, which is a little bit. I liken it to somebody saying, why are there black holes in the universe? Oh, it's just the science. Well, yeah, but that's a category of explanations. That's not that's an analytical. Right, that's an analytical category, not an analysis itself. Exactly, it's lazy, and it borders on sort of creating these dangerous culturalist notions, potentially racist ones, right? That's the way it is here, and it's an easy excuse, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's not from around there. Oh, you don't know how it works here. It's not like that around here. Well, actually, I don't know. A lot of times people will do that. It's the first time I've seen it in Ethiopia, and because of my accent, people might think that I, like you, just got here about a year ago. But I've actually not only lived there for 6 years, but I've been coming here since a child. And the culture does not stay the same, right? Like the way in which people interact, social relations, cultural relationships, work relationships, the social structures have evolved significantly since even I was a child, and I'm not even that old. So. But it is just let's take a step back for a second. Tell us what brought you to Ethiopia in the first place, or what made a New Yorker, because you're of Eritrean background, right? Not so much Ethiopian. What made you decide to come here, buddy?
So, I came here 2 years ago first I had it was a 1 month, January of 2019. I stayed in Addis for 1 week and I went to Asmara for 2 weeks. I wanted to, because I have a background in business development, international development as well. I have done projects for different organizations, institutions. So I wanted to expand. I was only based in West Africa. Like the work I've done is in Ivory Coast, specifically Ivory Coast in Nigeria. I had a little stunt in Kenya. It wasn't really something to brag about, to be honest, but I wanted to I wanted to drive into my passion. Or like I have a 20-year goal, which is to go from in African capacity development and infrastructure development and everything like that, just African development period, and then move from the development side to leadership eventually over the next 20-something years. So that was always my goal.
Leadership in the corporate sense, in the political sense?
Yeah. Like leadership, political leadership. But in that's like when I'm like 55, 60. That's the proper age to be a politician.
Sure. After having developed this technical literacy, I don't know if you know who Andrew Yang is.
Yes, of course.
Asian American guy, ran for president last time.
Yeah, tech startup guy.
Yeah, tech startup guy. He had been in the Obama administration. He was pushing universal basic income, right? UBI. And whatever you want to say about him, one of the reasons a lot of people, including myself, liked him is that he was like technically proficient. He had been in the startup world. He had been in development, and then it was in middle age. I think he's in his 40s or 50s. That he decided now's the time to go into politics. Now that you have a background in sort
the
of
private sector, go into the public sector.
Sure.
So something like myself, like that's and I always viewed the AU as a place to start with institutional and agency structuring and development. So I just didn't find that due to issues, I didn't have the time nor the inclination to base myself in up until there was peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia.
Right.
I didn't feel the need to come to Ethiopia. Just not as I would say more out of concern.
Had you been to Eritrea though?
Oh, before.
Okay, you've been to Eritrea.
Growing up, but as like a diaspora guy, kid going back to to see family, to spend the summer.
Sure.
It wasn't
Same
nothing.
as I,
nothing in terms of like actual bringing development back into the country.
So, but as an Eritrean American, Eritrean, what was your conception of Ethiopia? What did you think of Ethiopia?
We'll get there. Hold on, that's a good one. That's a good one. But let me. So what brought me to Ethiopia first? Let's finish that one.
Jumping the gun.
Yeah. That's a hell of a shotgun right there. But essentially though, in 2019, I went to Eritrea and Ethiopia to do the initial discovery stage on the economic freedom, upward mobility, socioeconomic dynamics. I was in my discovery research stage, finding out how can I contribute to this region, to not just Eritrea or Ethiopia, but to the Horn, including Somalia and Djibouti. But that was I was in the exploration stage. 2019, 2020, I returned 2020 January for diaspora. They had a diaspora homecoming here. Did the same thing. Came to Addis, went to Asmara, did the same thing. Did paperwork. Went to different agencies. Got some registration done. Simple, just laying the groundwork. And then when COVID hit, / the unpacking of American white supremacy and George Floyd, all the things that happened during COVID 2020. Kind of pushed my 20-year plan to expedited it, and then I noticed the system needed and then obviously the conflict was something that kind of worried me in the beginning when I said, okay, should I be going into a country in civil war right now? And then there was a job opportunity that showed up at the same time, and then I felt a way to participate in some level to the to the crises. Like, what can I do as an because I'm a hands-on person. I hate people who just speak from afar about, like, they know it all, but you don't really step. You know.
Sounds like the diaspora.
I hate.
Yeah, it's very annoying. Yeah.
Very annoying. The diaspora politics.
It's especially because it's easy when you are, you know, I called this once in a piece I wrote, the buffer separating the agent of action from the consequences of those actions. It's easy to do the rah-rah, hoy-hoy thing that a lot of people in the diaspora do when you're not the one who's going to, you know, suffer the consequences if things boil over into violence. Or
essentially, to shorten up, to make it very short, what you just said, I don't talk about it. I want to be about it. Right? Talk the talk, walk the walk. So I'm a walk the walk kind of guy.
Be the change you want to see.
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. So that's what brought me to. I've been based in Ethiopia, but I've been going in between Asmara, Kenya. I have to go to Nairobi, Abuja in a couple of weeks. So I'm basing myself in Africa, but my headquarters is in Addis right now.
Right, it sounds like you're doing quite a few different things. So now, if we could go back to that question, there where I jumped the gun. Your conception of Ethiopia and what your expectations were, and so on, is coming here for the first time as someone who grew up Eritrean in the United States.
What was my conception of Ethiopia as an Eritrean diaspora?
Yeah, and as yourself.
As Sammy. Okay, this is a little bit unpacking here. So, growing up, I will say this, that I was raised, so you got to understand, I was born in 1988. I was technically I was born as an Ethiopian. I became Eritrean at the age of 3, 1991, 1992.
Where were you born?
I was born in New York.
Right, okay.
But legally, I'm talking about legally, Eritrea did not become, they got its independence in 91. Yeah. No, they defeated the Derg in 91. They attained legal sovereignty and independence in 1993. Yeah, cool. So I am older than my identity, technically. I mean, Eritrean identity has been around forever.
And you're just too young to remember that, right?
To remember the Derg, yeah. I'm too young to remember the Derg.
And not just that, but Eritrea, the time before the existence of Eritrea as a state, you're like right on the cusp. Because I was born in New York in '86, so I'm about a year and a half, 2 years older than you. And one of my earlier memories, but I was just old enough to remember, is people showing me the map and being like, "Oh, you remember how there was like the top part of the country? Yeah, that's gone now. Now we don't have a port." And I was like, "What? How does that happen?" Right? But yeah, so just on the cusp, right? I'm remembering that.
So I remember being like 4 or 5 years old, celebrating. There's a picture of me with a white, you know, that white gabi thing, holding 2 Eritrean flags. I'm just a kid smiling, just I have no idea what's going on. It's just like, okay, where are we now? We're Eritrean. Okay, cool, we're Eritrean. So I was just too young to understand that.
But you were told that you were Ethiopian before that.
No, I actually. No. I was too young.
You weren't told anything.
I was just a kid. Like they told me to go to bed, go to school, and that's it. Okay. So, but when I finally when the celebration for the after the independence, then I was like, oh, we're Eritrean. I didn't know anything prior about that because I was like 5 or 6 at the time. But so, growing up, there was this idea that okay, you know, what happened. I had to learn slowly about what happened. And, you know, I only heard things in the Eritrean perspective in the household, for the most part. Now, what didn't help was my first time I ever went to Eritrea, I was like 7 to 8 years old, right? That was when the Nakfa just was announced, like the new currency, blah, blah, blah. It was posted on, I remember the photos of the currency was posted on the Italian cinema, Imperial Cinema movie theater, whatever they call it. But,
and some people think that the Nakfa and the issues over coffee and the sale of coffee abroad, etc., over the border and Nakfa were like the real reasons, or at least contributed to the border war.
Ooh, we'll get there. We're getting there.
We're getting there. I'm trying to get
Ooh, yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
Right, so go ahead.
It's cool. Keep bookmark that exact thing though. That's good. So before the border war, I was mainly taught in the community center. It was the only Eritrean community center in Harlem. It was 125th, right under the 1 train. Right across from the McDonald's on 125th Street.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So now it's the Columbia University building. So there was when they kind of like taught us Tigrinya, They taught us history. They taught us nationalism, patriotism. They taught us just the basic gist as like youth, the Eritrean youth.
Right, similar to the community gathering center in Abyssinian or Riverside Church, Abyssinian Church.
Right.
Like for just a few blocks down on the western side.
Yeah. There was a different element. Yeah, there was a different element to this because Eritrea, you got to understand it, where it was it's a startup nation. It's still a startup nation to this day. It's still in its startup stage. It's about to reach its growth. So, but in 1996, it was very, very young. So they were just letting everyone know, especially the youth in the diaspora. They were letting us know your identity, your language, your history, your culture. That's when I started to find out. Like that's when they like, you know, I knew that I had an uncle pass away before I was born, and I had an aunt that died during the border war defending Asab. She was there was many people died because they were trying to make a blitz to I guess just occupy Asab. So like growing up, this was what I was told. This is what I had to know. I had family members died from Ethiopians. Not necessarily. They didn't really say any ethnic group. They just said Ethiopians.
Usually it's not even. I mean, it's a lot of people died on both sides on the border war.
Mm-hmm.
But what I noticed about Eritreans abroad is everybody has lost multiple people close to them in the War of Liberation, the 30 years civil war.
We call it the struggle.
The struggle. There you go.
Yeah.
Right, but that looms very large on people's minds, especially in the diaspora.
Yeah, there's not one Eritrean that did not lose a family member in the struggle for independence, as well in combination with the border war. There's not one. Everyone has lost bare minimum 2.
Right.
Everyone, because it's a small population, you know.
But that's also, sorry to keep cutting you off, but I find this also interesting is that Eritrea, when I remember those years that you're talking about, being a kid, when we were both kids, in the mid-90s, like between the border war and independence, or even in the early border war, I sensed, and maybe I had this Ethiopian bias, but I sensed that the media was favorable, not entirely, but somewhat favorable to Eritrea. And that, you know, the reason being, like having an embassy in Asmara was like kind of cool. Like it was like the cool place to be. You know, people were referring to ISAF work in the same way they were talking about George Washington. It's a small population, educated people. By all accounts, I've not been to Eritrea, but you see pictures of Asab, Massawa. You see, you know, parts of Asmara that look like Piazza or National Theater around Addis Ababa. You know, like really beautifully built old colonial buildings.
Vintage, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, educated people, and also incredibly strategic value. Like Ethiopia's strategic value was really the fact that Eritrea was part of Ethiopia for a long time, right? The information hub that existed in Asmara.
The CIA thing?
Yeah. No, but also like 2 ports on the Red Sea. You know what I mean? So like Eritrea was the place to be, and I don't know, I guess some of that was squandered over the years afterwards.
So basically, my perception or conception of Ethiopia, it was basically like I had to do some learning, soul searching eventually in my later years, in my 20s especially, but it was morphed, like my perception morphed and shaped on its own throughout time. Whether it be through conflicts, through interactions in the diaspora, which was when I was like 19 or 20, I was introduced to this Facebook. Facebook had a very toxic room that it was large. It had like 5,000 people in it. It was called Ethiopian and Eritrea United, like something like that, and it triggered a lot of Eritreans because it's like, wait, hold on, we too many of us died for you to say united. Absolutely. Like there's no like what like, and then you know like there was like, for instance, there was a moment I had, and I was like maybe 21 at the time, 2021. I was in DC, and you know I always consider myself Habesha, right? Like because that's what my mom and I learned in at home. So when I was in DC, Washington, I went to some kind of like store, like let's just say 7-Eleven, right? And I saw a woman who is clearly Habesha. I was like, oh, Habesha, you know, because I don't care about the difference between Ethiopia and Eritrea. You're Habesha, right? I can see it. So I said, you know, salam. And then she starts speaking to me in Amharic. And I'm like, oh, hold on. I'm sorry, I don't. She goes, you don't speak Amharic?
How old were you?
I was like 20, 21.
Oh, okay.
She was like, you don't speak Amharic? You're not, I thought you was Habesha. You're not Habesha? I said, wait, hold on. So I have to, Habesha means Amharic speakers? Because that kind of messed up my view.
But you only realized that there were people who thought that way when you were 20, 21?
No, this was my first time seeing. This is my first, and this is literally the first time I'm being exposed to this kind of, I guess, misconception on her end. On their
I'm just
end.
surprised that it took till 2021, right?
Well, yeah.
Like from an Ethiopian perspective in the diaspora, like to me, like, oh, you're Ethiopian? Oh, yeah, son, I'm not Indian. Like, we're going to speak Amharic. They might speak Tigrinya, but it's, you know what I mean? The assumption is...
Yeah.
That's
Because I get... No.
Maybe that's just my advice.
No. I get it from the perspective of, like, okay, like, I get it. But at that time, let me tell you, I was too young. I was still forming my political consciousness at this time. Especially my identity was still, like, it was set in stone, but it's still changing and adapting, you know, over time. And my Eritrean identity, my Eritrean diaspora identity as well. So, you know, when she gave me this look of confusion, like, wait, you don't speak Amharic, but you claim to be Habesha? How is that possible? So I said to her, like, oh, I speak Tigrinya. The look on her face drastically changed.
Right.
I didn't
see that.
It was like I could see the fire in her eyes. And then I said, and I had to immediately like say I didn't think of anything about it, but I saw it, and then I said, yeah, my family is Eritrean. Then the look on her face went from like anger to like a sort of her expression changed, and now the way she said these words, I'm gonna repeat it.
Go ahead.
I have to try to get it exactly how she said it. She said, we are the same. We are family. But the look she gave me with it was like, how dare you?
Yeah.
And I was like, what is like? I felt the anger from her, and I was like, what did I do just now?
I've heard that expression so many times. We are family. We're the same people. Tekas Nagash has that book on the Ethiopian and Eritrean War, or the Civil War, which is brothers at arms. Oh, but sometimes people do it almost. Aggressively, we're family, and don't think it. But the funny thing is, when you talk about unity and how like too many people died for us to be unified, kind of thing, I know exactly what you mean from both sides. Because when I was in college, we had a student union. Stanford had a student union, Ethiopian student union, Stanford Ethiopian student union, and then there were Eritreans who were like with us, and we wanted to hang out, we wanted to work together. But like there were some people who were like, how about it be called Stanford Ethiopian Eritrean Student Union? CISU was the CESU. And then I realized neither side wanted that. Neither side, we all wanted to hang out, so in an informal way we wanted. But as you said, like from the Eritrean perspective, it was like, no, like too much. We've done too much to try to be independent to like suddenly, you know what I mean, just accept that. And then from the Ethiopian side, you know how Ethiopians are. It's like, no, the name has to be Ethiopia. We're not compromising the name. So it was this weird paradoxical thing where on the one hand, both sides wanted to unite in an informal way and work together and hang out together and have our events together, but neither side really wanted it in that formal sense. You know?
So what you just said kind of honed back. So after that experience I shared with you with that one individual, you know, I took with me that, and I went to my stepdad and I asked him like, you know, this I told him like this happened. You know, this woman she did this, and you know, what's up with that? And he kind of very logic, like very chill and relaxed. He kind of explained it very simply. He goes, oh, she was probably Amhara. They're bitter about our independence. They don't respect your Eritrean sovereignty. But very casually, he said.
Yeah. Bam, 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 bam.
Yeah, and in my head,
that means point A, point B, point
C. Yeah, and I was like, I was like 2021. So I was like, okay, is this a reality? Is this? Yeah. But I took it as.
I'm just surprised that you just realized it's a 2021 because that's years after the border war.
Yeah, this was years after the border war.
I guess, were you like kind of removed from the community during the border war? That it took you a while to realize?
So actually, in I didn't really, you know, in New York City, I was always around Eritreans, always. Okay. And I didn't see any Ethiopians, and I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe I was in a bubble. Maybe I didn't notice it. The neighborhood I was in was very dominantly Eritrean. In the Bronx, very Eritrean. In Harlem, very Eritrean. The church, I was in this Eritrean bubble in New York City.
Ethiopians, actually, New York is not a big Ethiopian
at that time.
At that time, it's. I mean, so we were in Jersey for a while. There was Roosevelt Island. The UN Ethiopians in Jersey. There's obviously DC, LA, San Jose. There are these obviously large enclaves where everybody kind of gravitates together. But I never got a vibe of like an overwhelming Ethiopia. A little bit more towards the end. But New York was never really a major Ethiopian.
No, it was more DMV.
Yeah. Compared to a lot of the other major cities in the U.S., LA, DC.
DC was DMV. DC was definitely the hub. It was a hub for both, mainly Ethiopians, but there's definitely Eritreans, definitely. But yeah, so
you weren't exposed.
I wasn't exposed to that. I mean, so I didn't start becoming exposed until I started to go to those. To DC, there was every year in August there was like an Eritrean festival. Soccer, there was a soccer thing, but an Eritrean festival where the musicians would come, everyone would just gather, networking, and a lot of stuff was happening there. Our parents were trying to set up arranged marriages with. I was like 14. My mom was trying to set me up with this other 13-year-old girl with a family, like the same thing as Arabs do it, right? Arranged marriages.
Sure.
Not even Arabs, they do it here too, right?
Yeah.
So. That was happening too. So, but it wasn't only in DC was when I was exposed to Ethiopian community. New York never really. I didn't never really see them until I was maybe around 25, 26. Then it's like, oh, they're here. Like and the way I got exposed it's funny. It was like a get together happening at my friend's place, and everyone in the apartment was Eritrean, and he comes in with like 5 Ethiopian girls. Beautiful. And I said, oh, this, and then you can, and now I visually was able to see the difference between, like, there's a bunch of Eritrean women here. This is now I'm getting to see the, like similarities and differences. Just in the
Tell me you're not telling me that you're interested in Ethiopia, and a long way of answering this question is when you start realizing the beauty of Ethiopia.
Well, I saw.
Not purely. Right?
No. It's more than superficial. Yeah. No. But basically, that was my literal, like, my first exposure as like an adult. I would say like in my professional prime or more or less.
So you start noticing differences.
But then I wanted it, just superficially, yes, but I wanted to explore the mentality too.
Sure.
Because I at this point I was exposed to mainly on the digital aspect, the arguments on like Facebook, mainly on Facebook, of what people think. So if I was trying to say like are these views like ubiquitous? It's like, is this happening? Are these views being projected onto, or not? Is it going from? Is it staying only on Facebook, or do most Ethiopians believe this stuff?
I have a similar experience. So first of all, I should point out, you and I spent a lot of time in West Africa when I was younger. Right? You say you have the connection with West Africa. There's the New York connection, is the Ethiopia there, and then also we both spent a good amount of time in the Bay Area.
I had some time in the Bay Area.
So a lot of the same kinds of worlds, but regardless, I mean, social media, speaking of the Bay Area, this is where it all erupted, Facebook and that whole world, Zuckerberg and the different people involved in that. Social media and the tech world in Silicon Valley, I think, kind of changed our understanding for people like you and I of how these discussions go about, because the traditional media was either state media or was the Western media or maybe like oppositional media, but you didn't necessarily get to see a platform where what you just described, which is these opinions, this thought process, like that woman who gave you that look and expressed that view. You were not aware of it because it took a while before social media kind of came along, and now suddenly, right, where people are airing the kind of view that woman had sort of repressed and expressing in that kind of indirect way, right? So I think when social media came to the fore, suddenly it kind of opened up Pandora's box, and we suddenly started having conversations about these things.
Especially in the comment sections, which things get much lost in translation, because you got a lot of English-speaking people, second language English speakers, trying to express themselves, and it sounds very blunt and disrespectful. But it's just the only way it's the most efficient way for them to communicate.
Everybody sounds blunt and disrespectful speaking in a second language.
Yes.
Everybody.
Yes. Exactly.
That could be a problem. That could ignite a fire.
Yeah, very much. And so essentially, like, I had to do some relearning, re-education. Like that was another thing I had to, back to the first question you asked. Right. What are some of the things I had to learn, taught myself, was, to accept differing views. And regardless, because we're in a place. Africa is built on people's, is less nationalistic identities, more tribalistic identities.
Sure.
Or Eritreans, we're more nationalistic. More like, even there's nine ethnic groups, but we're mainly nationalistic. We don't go by ethnic stuff. So, but I'm in a place I've understood already. I'm in a place that things are unfortunately goes by your ethnic identity, which comes with sometimes comes with a philosophy, a collective philosophy attached to that. There are political philosophies that are surgically ingrained into cultural identity, national or cultural identities. Like, for instance, there's the Eritrean identity, right? The Eritrean identity, there's a political philosophy behind it. It's called Shabia. Everyone, I noticed that's another thing.
I heard that word a million times during the border war.
Yeah,
that was like the insult. I don't have anything against Eritrea, but the Shabia.
I noticed that here too. Shabia. People say the word Shabia to refer to the Eritrean government.
Right, and EPLF in particular.
Yeah. So particularly EPLF. Yes. Yeah. So, but Shabia is actually a political doctrine. It's a philosophy. It's because there are Ethiopians who are mentally Shabia. So that's why. Like, you have people who think like Shabia, but Shabia, I guess the people who created it are the EPLF. The EPLF created the identity, so the ideology. So, but the actual the government entity is called Higdif.
Well, what is meant by Shabia?
Shabia.
What is that philosophy?
What is the?
How would you describe it?
So I mean, it's actually online actually. So it's basically the guidelines, the salient points on it is mainly revolving around the right to self-determination, and sovereignty and identity, cultural preservation. What is it called? How they say it? Let me say it in English, but it's 9 groups, 2 religions. No, 9 groups, 9 ethnic groups, 9 languages, 2 religions, 1 people. Hade Libi. Hade Libi means 1 people. So it's supposed to revolve. It's basically nationalistic and anti-tribalism, anti like religious and tribalistic differences. So because all 9 ethnic groups contributed in the fight for independence.
Sure. So like greater Unitarian nationalism.
It's a very Unitarian.
Right. Which in Ethiopia is pretty dominant. I mean, we call it Ethiopia. I mean, not very, but it's the same. Like, rather than divide or define ourselves as wrong, sub-nationalists, like greater Unitarian kind of nationalism. Right. Which I suppose Eritrea holds in common. In that.
Right. So people who were taught in the ways of Shabia, you call like them Shabia. But I know Ethiopians refer to Shabia as the Eritrean government.
When you say that Ethiopians there are Ethiopians who are Shabia, you mean people who believe in like Ethiopia, not kind of?
No, there's Ethiopians who accepted the Shabia ideology, which is like we have all these ethnicities, but one nation, one people, 2 religions. However many languages.
About Ethiopia or about Eritrea?
No, about Ethiopia. There are Ethiopians who believe that
That sounds like the majority of Ethiopians.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, okay. Well, you're right. But it sounds like a lot of Ethiopians. Definitely.
So basically that's so Shabia is a philosophy that was political ideology that was surgically ingrained into the Eritrean ethos, the Eritrean culture, the Eritrean identity. Mm-hmm. So similarly, how you refer to Wayane as the political entity, but it's actually a way of it's a political philosophy.
And it's also a reference back to previous
rebellions.
Previous peasant rebellions.
Several rebellions, I think. But so it's they have a manifesto. There is a doctrine that does describe the Wayane like philosophy is like because they don't want. Theirs is a little different than Shabia's. Theirs is like, I wouldn't even say little, it's quite different. It goes around like preservation of identity and culture because there's a few things. I don't want to get too deep into it, but you can look it up. Everyone, listeners, you can look it up yourself. But yeah.
Okay, so can I take a step back? This is my understanding of kind of the direction things went in Eritrea. Mm-hmm. If we could take a step back and I'm going to lay out a few things here, and I want to kind of hear what you have to say. So, First off, of course, all this goes back to the colonial era, and before then, even differences of a number of different kinds, right? And then, after the Italians are removed by the Allies in 1941, there is a federation that is created in the ensuing years after World War II. Haile Selassie, around 1960 or early 60s, unilaterally dissolves that federation, which I think most people see as one of his most significant mistakes. It ignites a 30-year war of liberation. And Eritrea starts to define itself. I mean, when you talk about Shabbat, a lot of it is defined along the lines of having participated in this liberational struggle. And even the Eritreans that I meet in Addis Ababa, there's suddenly an influx of a lot of Eritreans, like from Eritrea. I sense something different about people, not because they're Eritrean, but almost always because, and I sense after a while, I was like, oh, this person was in the military for years. Like, I sense it even around Americans who were in the military for years. Like, this person is a hard ass. Like I don't mess with somebody who's gone through military training and who's gone through conflict for years, because I just sense that there's like a brittleness, like a hardened aspect to who this person
Especially
is.
if they have scars.
Right. And yet, like, I've met an Eritrean guy like that who has all these funny near-death stories. It was a doctor, and it was kind of a goofball, but still, underneath the goofball, there's still that, like, hard-ass kind of thing going on. And anyway, so then with the border war, we were talking about before, tell me what you think of the perception of this, because I heard this multiple times. I read this in papers and so on at the time, from an Ethiopian perspective. Right? I would come here over the summers and so on. People were saying, well, it's a interpersonal dispute on some level. It's bad blood that goes back between people who fought together and so on. But there's an economic determinist angle to this, which is to say, first, Eritrea developed the Nakfa. Obviously, it's inflationary when they have all that extra birr lying around, and kind of just passed it off to Ethiopia, without Ethiopia really having the capacity to absorb the blows of the inflation. And then that the Eritrean government was buying coffee in birr, thus the domestic market, and selling it almost as its own cash crop on the international market in dollars. And that these two sort of abuses, or perceived abuses, is part of what kind of pushed things towards that conflict. Tell me, where is that narrative right, and where is it wrong as far as you know?
Oof. Okay. Well, you want to stick to the latter one, because I know you mentioned about the Haile Selassie.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we'll stick to the latter one.
Okay.
We'll go back in time after this one.
Right.
So there's so many aspects to the border war. What led up to it. You would have to listen to. I can send you actually perfect analysis. There's an analysis in Amharic. It's about a 2-hour video on YouTube. It would give you the perfect breakdown on what went down between Meles and Isaias, right? It's honestly, it's not just between them, but it is, half of it is between them. Half of it.
So it's a personal disagreement.
It's personal and political and like betrayal. There's a few things that's involving to this. There's a few things. But I'm not going to go on speculations.
Sure, okay.
Because there's a lot of things we can speculate. But this is not a private forum right now. So, and privately, I can throw some speculation.
Okay, so let's just focus on the economic.
Gotcha. No, I'm sorry. So, essentially, leading up to the creation of the Eritrean currency, the Nakfa, there was some disagreements specifically between the Eritrean government and the Ethiopian government at the time. One of the main things that caused a rift between both governments was because of the Ethiopian constitution that was implemented, and many Ethiopians saw it before. So what happened was Ethiopians saw what was going on. They saw how the constitution is. Basically, they saw it as anti-Ethiopian. So they were doing protests. In 1994, 1995, they were doing some protesting around it.
Especially the right of nations and nationalities to self-determination up until and including secession.
Yes. There was a lot of protests happening, but no one really talks about what started that protest. And it was when Isaias Afewerki announced in the Amharic language, he basically to shorten it up, he basically said to Ethiopians, like, listen, this constitution here is going to hurt you guys. This is not good. And he personally advised Meles, listen, why are you doing this? This is not going to be good for the country. And what Isaias said was like his response, Meles' response was, well, it'll be good for us Tigrayans. That's what basically he said, to sum it all up. So he saw that. So
this is Isaias.
Isaias, yeah, he has his,
okay.
he has these he goes into these rants like every once a year he does a State of the Union address where he just talks for like 2.5 hours.
And what I find interesting,
he did it 3 days ago actually.
Yeah, but see, what I find interesting is that the guy has maintained power for a long time, and he's dealing with, as any head of state, has a lot to deal with in 30 years. And yet, so much of his time is spent talking about like factional struggles among student movement parties in the 1970s, and I'm like, dude, like, you still care about that? Like, most people don't even know that ever happened, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's 76, I think. Yeah, so like the guy went through a lot. The guy's seen a lot, and he speaks several languages. Even a little bit of Mandarin. This guy, he's very versatile. So it's very. I'm not giving him too much credit,
no.
but the guy is very very interesting guy. But so basically, I'm just going about what we know on record and what we know through the experiences of those who actually were there, especially like Isaias. So because when he speaks, when he says his side of the story, it's like I'm paying attention. So basically, it was the rift between the EPRDF/TPLF and the Eritrean government was when Isaias personally announced, or the government made an announcement saying the Ethiopian constitution is inherently wrong, basically to say the least. That's what the bad blood started between both governments when that happened, because they saw that as the Eritrean government is fueling.
Okay, but what about the economic aspect?
We're getting there right now. So there was a few elements about the economic side. You have to remember, do you remember how a lot of the economy, like I think about a third of the economy in Ethiopia and Addis was mainly operate like Eritreans born and raised in Addis Ababa, they kind of owned a third of they were 8% of the population, but they controlled roughly.
The
Amiches, yes. I don't want to get into that story, but the Amiches, Eritreans, were a small group that controlled about 35% of the economy.
Sure.
They sort of were facilitating in some of the economic measures that was happening in the country at the time, when it came to the reallocation of wealth from Addis back to the north, back to Asmara. So they were facilitating, the Amiches were essentially facilitating the growth of Eritrea using the amassed bir currency they have,
which was part of the that was the main justification for the waves of people being expelled.
Yeah. For the forced
they're
expulsion.
taking our wealth and sending it to Asmara.
They ripped up a bunch of people's birth certificates saying like, you're not Ethiopian, you can't claim your businesses or your homes when you can never say anything. So goodbye, get out. So basically there was some level of from my understanding. There was some the Eritreans in Addis were facilitating some form of currency. They were sending a lot of bir back to Eritrea, basically. Now, there was, I don't know, the coffee thing you mentioned. I'm not heard of it, but it doesn't surprise me.
What about the Nakfa aspect?
So the Nakfa was announced in I believe it was 1996. It was when it was published that there's a new currency coming out, right?
A couple years before the war.
It was a year before the expulsion of 80,000 Eritreans in Addis in Ethiopia. It was a year before that. But so the currency kind of raised a big red flag when it because if the idea that the TPLF had their own manifesto that they created in 1975, which shows it's called Abai Tigray, which means Greater Tigray, which is essentially. They were essentially expanding land into the map. They were expanding their borders past their natural borders pre 1991. They were taking Raya, Walgait, and then eventually they would expand all the way into Asab and take Eritrean land. So their goal was to expand and so that they can eventually become their own nation. that's what this manifesto says anyways. Their plan was to create their own country eventually. They just needed port access and access to at least the port and to another country, Sudan. So they didn't have it prior to 91. So the creation of the Nakfa was essentially a huge threat to their greater Tigray plan, because what's another way to solidify your sovereignty as a country? Currency, because until they created their own currency, they were riding on the back of either the dollar or the birr, mainly. So when they saw that as a currency creation, they saw that as a threat to their plans of expansion.
It is hard to imagine that Eritrea could have not had its own currency. Of course, yeah, but okay. So the currency was it was mainly what antagonized the leadership of the Ethiopian leadership, because it basically signaled to them that we're going to be trading on different terms now, right. Because now it's monetary policy that's involved in this. And the clause involving secession in the Constitution.
Right.
So you're identifying those as the two. Okay. Can we take a step back? The Haile Selassie thing about dissolving the Confederation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair to say? I mean, to me, on the surface of things, right? And I studied Ethiopian history, and when I look at Eritrea, it was always from an Ethiopian perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm familiar with certain historians who you don't necessarily aren't enamored with, but okay. And I get that. But, like, to me, that's one of the most fundamental mistakes that set both countries back. Because at the time, I don't think too many people thought of Eritrea as viable as a state.
Mm.
And I think Eritreans mostly accepted that. There was even, years later, there was some effort early on with the Daga rapprochement, because there was a historical figure, it was a very important person named Amanandom, a general who was killed in the same night as the Sitsa. Although he was killed separately. They went into his house with a tank, famously, and so the Daga did. But originally they propped him up.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first head of state of Ethiopia as a republic, is an Eritrean.
He was Eritrean,
who was specifically chosen to try and create a rapprochement with the rebels who had been fighting over 10 years already by then in Eritrea. So I guess all this is to say, is it fair to say that decision, which I don't understand beyond the fact that Haile Selassie loved power, that unilateral decision is one of the great strategic mistakes in this whole...
The annexation of Eritrea?
Yeah, the dissolution of the
Federation
arrangement. Yeah.
So that there's several, but that is one mistake. One giant policy blunder was the annexation. But I think I'd rather talk about the small things that led up to that, because we can talk about how, like, Haile Selassie basically took all the industrial factories in Asmara, the ones that the Italians left behind, the automobile factory, the manufacturing plant, textiles, all there was over 70 different factories. All of them were just taken from Asmara to Addis. And Eritreans at the time, they saw that as like, who are these these are non-Tigrinya speakers with guns coming to our land, taking all our machinery, all our jobs. To them, they saw that as like looting. Basically, there was like, why is this happening? What they didn't take into consideration, which when I say they, I mean Haile Selassie, he never considered the Eritrean Muslims. Never considered that, which was that's what started the revolution. That's what started the fight for independence. There was never so Eritrean Muslims, just like any other Muslim, to be honest, but Eritrean Muslims have always lived side to side with Eritrean Christians for like going back hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's never been a beef with Eritrean Muslims and Christians, but the Eritrean Muslims have always seen external Christians, like the Italians, as or Haile Selassie, and they saw external Christians as a threat to them, because they were like, they don't want to talk, they don't want to deal with any other Christians besides the ones that they said they're neighbors. That's just they saw that as a threat, basically.
Yeah, gotcha.
So Haile Selassie, he is one of his titles is the head of the church, right? Mm-hmm. More or less. Mm-hmm. So they saw him as a very big enemy of them, of their religion, of their identity. Because some Muslims, not all Muslims, but some Muslims, and I would even include Eritreans, not all, sometimes if they don't put their religion before their identity, their national or their ethnic identity, sometimes it's on the same level. It's like it's the same. It's like it's parallel to their actual ethnic identity, ethnic or national identity. So Haile Selassie did not consider them at all when it came to from 1950 from the Federation to the annexation. Never considered them, which they ended up being the first people to grab weapons, grab arms, and fight. They were the first one. The ELF, which AKA Jebha, they call it Jebha. They were the ones who began it, and then that's when
before EPLF, it was ELF.
Yeah, ELF, yeah, and they were all
Eritrean liberation.
They were all basically they were all basically not all of them, but most of them were Muslim. There was just still factions amongst them, but basically, the annexation was a policy blunder. But prior to that, the micro ones, before we get into the macro, was the lack of consideration to the Eritrean Muslims.
No.
That's what essentially.
So you see somebody defending Haile Selassie would jump in and say, well, wait a second, what about he was fine with the Muslims within Ethiopia. But, in a token sense, right, like you would allow some aspect of Sharia, but that was the case with almost everything with Haile Selassie, which is, there's a parliament, I allow, certain, but really behind the scenes, it's pretty much always in control, taking on as much power as possible. Now, we have to wrap up this segment, but I want to get back to this, and then there's where we'll pick up next time is also talking about the Derg and the policies of modernization, because we discussed when we first met how a lot of this was aggravated actually under the Derg. Ironically, the people who overthrew the Shah and Amhara elite actually came in and pushed for policies of modernization more than anything else. But I first of all just want to thank you so much for coming in and bringing your insight, and you're invited back anytime, and we will pick up this kind of discussion as soon as we possibly can.
Excellent, fantastic, great for being here. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Ras Temari Radio.